Alright, I thought I'd make a second video about finding God and fallenness, or finding God and fallenness in this video, as opposed to finding God in fallenness in the last video. Not technically what I was talking about, but I was just throwing off a couple random different things that tie in together thematically at some point, on some level, or something like that. But what does it mean to aim for the highest good, as Jordan Peterson would put it, or aim for Jesus Christ? What does this actually mean? What are the... How do you aim for that which is infinitely good and powerful and all-encompassing and so on? Right? Like, it's like, if you aim at infinity, right, infinity is more than everything. And it's like, how do you aim for that? It's confusing, right? So, you aim for the best you've got. And the best you've got is something like Frodo, or Samwise, or Faramir, or Aragorn, or Gimli, or Legolas, or Gandalf. But it's also, at least for a little while, Smeagol. Not necessarily Gollum. But that's why Smeagol and Gollum are two characters in the same person, basically. Because Smeagol is Gollum's better half. And Gollum is Smeagol's worse half. And it represents a split in someone who's tortured and corrupted very extremely and trying to do good for himself, but not necessarily understanding how to do good for other people so that he gets good in return. There's a phrase from Jesus: "He who loses his life for me gains his life. He who keeps his life loses his life." And then another version of this that Bishop Robert Barron points out is that sacrifice is not for God. God doesn't need our sacrifices. Our sacrifice is to give to God so that God gives back to us more than we had before. And of course, you can game the system on some level, and that's what usury is, or charging interest on loans and stuff like that. And you can game the system, but the general logic is very different than that. And basically, one of the things that they say is, give to others so that you may receive more, so that you can give even more to others. So that there's a back and forth and so on. And that's one of the things that makes us free association, not free trade between first and third world countries necessarily, because that's predatory on the first world, basically. But that's because it destroys the natural bonds of a nation of people trading freely and fairly with each other. That's why free trade between first and third world is bad, because it favors those who predate on the third world's workers for cheapness and predate on the first world's consumers or buyers of products. So they predate on the third world's people who make stuff, and they predate on the first world people who buy the stuff that the third world people made, and so on. They need to be stopped so that we can trade amongst ourselves in relative equality of living conditions and so on, as a people, and without a formal system of state control and domination and so on necessarily, or at least a much smaller state. And liberty is important for freedom, because without free will, for instance, there is no morality, there is no choice to love God, there is no choice to rebel, which is evil, but there's no real choice made to love God, Therefore, all supposed love of God is basically a machine doing exactly what it's told and meaningless to God. And part of learning what it means to be good is learning what it means to be good in various situations, and having I'm not sure about this, so take it with a grain of salt, but there's multiple routes or streams that go into a trunk or a river, and then it spreads out into a Nile or grows into the greenery or leaves and fruit of a tree. And it's aiming upwards, but it takes from multiple lower sources or small, minute things, like the nutrients of the ground, and focuses it in on the entity into a singular cause or loyalty that branches out in its expressions individually and so on. So you'll notice that it's not a just pyramid where there's a focal point at the top, and it's just pointed and sharp, and one thing only judges your exact character and so on. But our expressions grow out of that singular unity of cause and so on, so that we do multiple goods with one cause. And finding the right cause to grow into multiple goods in various situations is important. Because if you only believe, like, I will punish people who do bad things, right, then you become sadistic. And if you say, I will only give things to other people who ask for them or want them or something like that, I will only ever give things to people that want the thing, then you become licentious, which means taking license or not having any boundaries whatsoever. And we want to avoid sadism and condomination, and we want to avoid too much freedom and not caring about others or not protecting others from mistakes. So too much domination and cruelty, too much freedom, and not enough protection from mistakes. And you want to find some sort of middle ground area between the two, but it's not just middle ground always. It's not always taking, well, this person says one thing and this person says another, and I'm going to go exactly in between them no matter what, and so on. Sometimes someone's a little over this way and the middle is over here. Or sorry, sometimes someone is in the middle here and someone's over here. Or sometimes someone's over here and someone's in the middle. And you have to pick between two people on the opposite ends and being in the middle maybe, or someone who's already in the middle and someone who's far left or far right, politically, let's say, on an individual topic, for instance. So it's not necessarily so simple as taking the middle between two declarations of the world between two people and so on. Even in politics, let's say. So, yeah. And this goes for people talking about non-political things as well. And it's one of those things that you have to decide for yourself based on scrutiny and knowledge of the topic and so on, which is one of the reasons why studying individual situations is the roots that leads to the trunk or core principle and so on. And a truly good core principle isn't the I'm going to punish evildoers or I'm going to punish people who do bad things even a little bit. like there's a character that represents that particular version of it, which is Conrad Kurz of the Night Lords in Warhammer 40k, and like the guy will literally punish evil to the point, or punish wrongdoing, let's say, not necessarily evil, but like if you steal an apple because you're starving to death, he'll skin you alive, right? And that's the extreme case of punishing wrongdoing and so on. And that's what I mean by cruelty and sadism. You don't have to be quite that cruel to still be cruel and sadistic. Like, like if a Jewish lawyer took a bribe to sabotage his client's paying a fine for like $50 or something like that, and he took a $20 bribe. In that one particular case, if Hitler was like, oh, well, that's a corrupt Jew, and I'm going to put him in the death camps for the Holocaust, that's an example, again, of way too extreme behavior for punishing wrongdoing and so on. Licentiousness, I won't get into at the moment for video time's sake too much, but an example of this is giving people drugs because they like doing them and so on. Now, maybe you can get away with it with the occasional cigarette or marijuana or maybe a beer or something like that. Small, nothing too much, not too potent, doesn't twist the mind too much, or something like that. It's not as addictive as other things necessarily, unless it's alcohol to an alcoholic or something like marijuana to a schizophrenic or something. But giving methamphetamine and fentanyl to teenagers who want to try it out for fun is rather cruel and licentiousness and not protecting them from making mistakes. And that's too much freedom, basically, in a sense. It's not something they're capable of handling or judging or discerning from themselves, that they want to destroy their lives and so on, because they don't know what the end result is, because they've never seen it in action and so on. They're teenagers, not adults, basically. And even adults probably shouldn't be offered free drugs to begin with either, because it's a fake experience. I mean, it's technically real, the feelings are real on some level, but it's artificial on some level. It's manufactured, not earned or anything like that, so the feeling fades and then you feel worse. And it overloads the system so that it feels less good later on things that make it feel good that aren't the drug. So it sort of is, again, that sort of multiple things feeding into one unitary, solid, unitary thing that doesn't branch out into multiple goods in various situations. So it's dead. And the Star of David, or the Jewish star, Secret to Secret was saying that it's actually something that also exists in Asian culture or something like that, where it's a triangle like this, and this is upside down triangle intersecting with it, and so on. And if you notice, the roots of a tree go like this into the trunk, and the trunk goes like this into the bush part of the tree, the leaves and the fruit and so on. And that's the difference between a pyramid and a tree. The tree starts with multiple roots on the bottom, wideness, singularizes into the trunk, and then starts from the trunk and explodes into the bush with multiple again. Whereas the pyramid is just everything leads to one point and that's it, and it ends there and so on. And the pyramid, you'll notice, doesn't have fruit, which is important because the fruit is what leads to continuation and so on, and goodness for others and so on. That's the best way I can think of thinking about it, and I hope that helped a little bit. But yeah, worship life, not death. Sometimes death is necessary to inflict on someone who's inflicting it on others by a long shot, but you shouldn't worship death. And